Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm not sure where you're joining us from, but I'm very happy being here and delivering this webinar. And thank you very much for joining us. So my name is Penelope Trulinou. I'm a senior research analyst at Trilateral Research, which is a research, sociotech, and consulting SME based in the UK and in Ireland. My main research interests are in the intersection of technology and society. I study the social and ethical implication of technology in society, but also how this knowledge can empower citizens and raise awareness among technologists and policy makers. My academic background is disciplinary, but it's mainly on social studies, and this is the approach we're going to take today. And with my colleague Diotima, we're going to present to you today the webinar on misinformation on social media. Before we start, I would like to ask Diotima to also say a few words for her.
Thank you, Penelope. So my name is Diotima. I'm a senior researcher at Senior, research SME based in Vienna. I have a background in communication science and philosophy of technology. And similar to Penelope, I focus on the intersections of science, society, and technology, and the societal and social impacts of technology. And yeah, in the context of EUNOMIA, I research misinformation and its human and societal factors. And I'm really excited to have this webinar to do with Penelope.
And yes, this webinar is delivered in the context of EUNOMIA project, which is a 3-year EU-funded innovation action project that is actually coming to an end at the end of November. It has developed a sociotech solution to assist social media users assessing the trustworthiness of online information and fighting misinformation at the very early stages. So this webinar, as it's suggested by the title, will focus on misinformation on social media. We will start by framing the problem, exploring what misinformation is. This is quite important as we need to first understand the problem so to be able to address it. So following, we will examine the societal and the psychological factors that contribute in falling for false information, adopting false information, but also spread it further. Also, structural factors of social media are very, very important in this process, and we will discuss briefly about that. Finally, we will present the concept of information hygiene and 9 simple guidelines that social media users can adopt, so to flatten the curve of infodemic, as we say. So there are 3 types of information disorder: misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. There are very often they are used interchangeably, but they are very distinctive, and it's very important to understand the difference between these terms. So, because as I said, different disorders need a different approach. So misinformation refers to information that is false, but not it's not created with the intention of causing harm. So I will put that generally. Disinformation, on the other hand, is deliberately created to harm a person, a social group, an organization, or a country. Malinformation is quite more complex because it's information based on reality, but it's put out of context or is presented with false information also added on that, and it's used to inflict harm on a person, organization, country, etc. Now, very often we hear the term of fake news, which is purposely crafted, sensationally, emotionally charged, and to mislead, or it's fabricated information that mimics, though, the form of mainstream news. So this is the difference to the other 3 terms that we saw. So fake news is a term that has been very popular in mass media and public discourse. However, is rather a polarizing and fuzzy term. Studies have pointed out this polarization that I mentioned, which has been used mainly in political strategies of labeling news sources as fake news when they do not support the political views of the politicians that make use of this term. So in this presentation, in this webinar, we mainly focus on misinformation that is adopted and spread by the average social media users like us, but we don't want intentionally to harm. So they're not intentionally propagated. Now, the challenge that we are aiming to address is the challenge of infodemic. Infodemic refers to, it's a rather new term. It refers to a fast spread of both accurate and inaccurate information about something through a large, far-reaching community of users. So it's similar to the spread of the disease. So it comes from the two terms, information and pandemic. As there is a huge volume and a mix of messages spread, so they can be true, false, rumors, facts, it becomes very difficult and very complex for the users to decide to filter all this information and decide also which information to trust. So misinformation is not a straightforward, simple issue to address. It's rather a multi-layered societal challenge, which becomes deeper in a sense, more intense, due to the technological developments, as we will see. So the impact of misinformation was also shown during the global pandemic, and it's still shown, as it was challenging the effective public health response within an environment of confusion and distrust. Indeed, studies show that due to misinformation, disease peaked earlier, and it lowered even the intent to accept a COVID-19 vaccine.
Okay, thank you, Penelope. I will now give you a short overview of the most important insights from social sciences regarding the societal and human factors of misinformation. And we picked a couple of those. So we include this drive for consistency and like-mindedness, the impact of repetition on the way we perceive information, also the way we perceive the effects of misinformation on ourselves as well as on others, and how we select relevant information and how that is impacted by our trust in others. So I want to start with explaining why we strive for consistency and like-mindedness. And one explanation is provided by the theory of cognitive dissonance. It states that we look for consistency or consonance of our beliefs, attitudes, observations, knowledge, and so on. And when we are faced with inconsistencies, we experience psychological discomfort or dissonance. And because of this, we will try to reduce dissonance and avoid any situation and any information which would most likely increase dissonance. So if you think about the story, the famous story, The Fox and the Grapes. There's the fox who wants to eat the grapes, but he cannot reach them. And rather than to admit his defeat, he just states that they're too sour anyway, and he didn't want them after all. And this is one simple example for cognitive dissonance. A similar concept is the one of selective exposure. That means that we select information based on our predisposition, and we avoid any information that contradicts our beliefs. And that can lead to the famous so-called filter bubbles and echo chambers. Those are the results of different tools, algorithms, and behaviors that filter or rank information, but we will get to that in a bit. Particularly on the internet and on social media, the vast amount of information can become overwhelming. So to avoid what we call information overload, we adapt avoidance behavior, such as increasing our selectivity and only picking that information from those sources we already know and trust, and avoid others. This can be a very useful and effective strategy, but it can also lead to one-sided information and biases. And speaking of biases, another issue is confirmation bias. This describes the process in which we seek and interpret evidence. And this is done, as Nicholson says, in ways that are partial to existing beliefs, expectations, or a hypothesis at hand. So what does it mean? It means that we interpret new information based on already existing beliefs and expectations. So it means we look selectively for evidence that backs up what we believe and reject any information that contradicts it. And it doesn't even end there. We also tend to stick to our beliefs, what is called belief persistence. So once we have formed an opinion, it's often resistive to change, even if we face evidence that proves us wrong. And that is, in a way, connected to avoid cognitive dissonance. Another important aspect is how we think information or misinformation impacts others. I want to talk here about the third-person effect, which is something that comes from research on advertisement, but is also important in the context of misinformation. So the so-called third-person effect describes the discrepancy between a person's perception and the effect of misinformation on others and on themselves. So we tend to think that others are more susceptible to misinformation. And this can look harmless at the first glance, but it can be quite worrying because it can lead us to take action because we may anticipate how others could behave based on the information they perceive or the misinformation that may fool them. And on the other hand, if we underestimate the impact misinformation has on us and overestimate the impact it has on others, it can give us a false sense of security, and we may fall into the trap of falling for misinformation. Now, let's talk about how and why we select and trust information, because that's a complex process as well. Other persons, and especially if they are persons who we trust, are very important in this process. And one example from social science research are the so-called opinion leaders. They are politically interested, engaged, and knowledgeable, as well as trusted sources of information, at least within a specific network of information. And they influence how information is spread within a social network. And it is part of the logic of social media that information is shared and passed along between friends and acquaintances. And that's usually information that's not generally created in the social media network, but also news that is shared within that network. So because of this logic, because of the concept of opinion leadership, and because of what the theory of selected exposure tells us, we know that personal recommendation and sharing and personal created sharing of information has a big influence on the way we perceive that information. And that can be a way to fight misinformation, but it can also contribute to its spread. So for example, if my friend recommends a news story to me and I trust this friend, I am most likely trusting the news story more than I would have done if I just read it by myself. And I will also trust the news outlet that published the story more. Research has shown that this is a very important effect. And finally, I want to look at the way repetition influences how we perceive information. So the so-called illusory truth effect explains how we attribute higher credibility and more trustworthiness to information that we have read or heard before. So in short, repetition more credible and more trustworthy. And that is even true for statements that we have identified as false. But why does that happen? It's caused on one hand because we are more familiar with the information if we have read it or heard it before, and on the other hand, we process it faster and easier, and that causes this effect. Back to you, Penelope.
Thank you, dear Tima. And actually, I would like to stress here for the people who joined us later, because I try to follow also with the comments. In this webinar, we talk about misinformation, which is false information or distorted informations or half-true information that come from average media users without any intention to harm. So social media support the spread of misinformation because structurally the platforms encourage, first of all, everyone, all the users, to share their beliefs, their thoughts, their preferences, their personal moments, and so on. This means that we produce a vast amount of information in general without any further assessment of its content, without even us assessing the content, because we are not journalists, we just or we think we just produce information. Another key factor of misinformation on social media networks is that the selection of information to which users are exposed is made by the algorithms that run behind social media, multiplying then some offline behaviors and communication approaches that Diotima presented already. We always need to remember that these algorithms are created by the companies that aim to make a profit. They aim to keep users online and active, engaged as long as possible. This is how they can make profit. So maybe some of you have watched the Netflix documentary docudrama, The Social Dilemma. This explains in a very accessible way how algorithms operate on social media, because social media is not it's not a news agency, so they are not even accountable, or they were not accountable seriously about what is shown there. So to this end, algorithms serve and enhance the selective exposure that Diotima explained earlier to information. So social media create digital echo chambers where users are surrounded by people who think like them, reinforcing these pre-existing beliefs and ideologies. How is this done? Through the creation of filter bubbles that emerge from personalized searches when a website algorithm selectively predicts what information a user would like to see based on information that they collect about the user. This can be the location, past click behavior, search history, etc. Algorithms then reinforce the existing bias we have individually by promoting the information that confirm our views. And again, as Diotima explained before, when we have already a pre-existing belief, it's easier to accept this information. This means that the diversity of information on social media, at least the one that we are exposed to, is very low. And we're exposed to the same information over and over again. So if users are exposed to misinformation, it's not very easy and very likely to get exposed to diverse views of the story. And it's like we fall in a trap, and we are not very easy to escape. It's not very easy for us to escape from this. Finally, it's very, very crucial to keep in mind that audiences in social media are indeed very fragmented and unequal in their participation. Just a tiny minority of the social networks users is responsible for this large amount of content and activity. This minority is further split in 9% of occasional contributors and just 1% of heavy participants. And then it's also very important to mention here research that has shown that a very small number of these heavy internet users have consumed or consume false or misleading information that has been made to look like fact-based stories. So we can see that there are what is so-called knee-jerk solutions. So it's readily predictable solutions such as Facebook will flag misinformation, or fact checkers will do it for me, and or AI will flag misinformation, seem to have faced difficulties. They are intermediaries, and they are, as I said, they're readily predictable solutions that they have been mainly tried so far. but exactly because these solutions face this, why are these solutions face this difficulty? It's because, for example, if we take fact-checking, it often fails to effectively counteract misinformation. Also because users, it's very difficult to change their minds once they have already been exposed to misinformation that aligns to their prior beliefs, as we explained, but also because it's not very clear when it's very difficult even for fact-checking to go through all posts of social media users, etc. Furthermore, many users are suspicious towards fact checkers and they do not trust them, as they do not trust mass media, etc. However, it seems that early warnings have been proven more effective, possibly because they stop misinformation at a very early stage. And this is why we believe that there needs to be a shift of the attention to the user. Again, I want to stress that we talk about misinformation that is produced and reproduced by average social media users. So we want to see that users are consumers as well as creators and distributors of information in the context, again, of online misinformation. But most importantly, users are digital citizens. So citizens have the responsibility for their online participation, shaping others' beliefs, but also need to be trained in order to improve their judgment. Therefore, they need to take responsibility regarding their online behavior and decision on what they share and promote online. So that we don't need to rely on third-party fact checkers, for example, or any computer software to do this process for us. And also, in this sense, we have the responsibility of selecting the criteria to assess online trustworthiness. This, of course, brings us to the discussion of accountability mechanisms. The most obvious approach would be the expose of the real identity, and therefore this would mean the end of anonymity, following the practices we can see of popular social media like Facebook they're trying to do now. But anonymity can also increase novelty and empower minorities and activists to be heard without the fear of judgment and discrimination. So we cannot believe that just because anonymity will end and suddenly misinformation will stop as well, because we explored the reasons why we not only consume but produce also and spread misinformation. It's not about the anonymity. So deception can also be approached by focusing on the error and attempting to shield us from dishonesty. So for example, by filtering the information we receive, or increase, as we said, the abilities to detect and reject falsehoods. So it's not about the person, but the content to be assessed. So we need to assess the content and not to judge the content just because somebody that we trust said so. And this brings us to the discussion about trust. Because trust in our research, but also on the literature, is generally linked to credibility of the source. So we go back to the source. And this can be seen as opposing the anonymity we discussed in this context of freedom of expression and empowerment of minorities and vulnerable groups. And this is why it's very important to think again, what is the difference between trustworthiness and truth? Trust, we need to understand, is more is something more personal. Is something that I choose based on my criteria to trust a content, a piece of information, or somebody. And each person might adopt different trustworthiness indicator. So what we want to do here is to provide the tools to empower social media users to assess the trustworthiness of online information. And this is how we came to develop a new concept, that of information hygiene. So we have discussed that the intensity and the amplification of misinformation has led to the conceptualization of infodemic, as we discussed at the beginning of the webinar. Can I ask if you can change the slide? Sorry. And therefore, following the hygiene rules adopted to face the pandemic, we came to this new approach to address infodemic. And this approach is the information hygiene. So we do not look for curing the pathogenies, but rather to reduce that they do, like fact checking or the AI, etc. But we want to reduce the risk of the infection already. So to put it more simply, information hygiene is the practice of following daily routines that reduce the risk of consuming, acting upon, and sharing misinformation to our networks. So to do so, we have first identified 224 guidelines for addressing fake news, misinformation, disinformation provided by organizations such as mainstream media and professional fact checkers, public authorities, and universities. And then after removing duplication across all sets, we have narrowed down to 43 guidelines that then we did a further classification into 4 different categories that were identified. This is the how we assess the source of the information, the content itself, but also the language that is used, and the category of action recommendation to mitigate the risk. We followed the approach used in medical sector when they developed the hygiene guidelines, and so we consider peer review publications, and we use criteria like the venue, the support strength, and support time. So we assess the recommendation based on the quality of evidence, for example, where relevant studies do exist. And we had an interdisciplinary team doing this process. So we resulted in 9 recommendations being established as an easy to follow everyday routine, and that aims to lead to better information hygiene and help us flatten the curve of infodemic. These recommendations also fed into the development of our tools that we will present later. So let's start from going through these recommendations, which I think that, or we think as a team, that following those in our everyday practice will make a difference on how we assess online information. So the first one is be cautious of information forwarded to you through your network. So again, I want you to have in mind Diotima's presentation on the psychological and societal factors. Just because we tend to trust our friends, so again, we confuse the trust to the source to this of the content. So our cognitive filters weaken. I trust Diotima. I know she's a trustworthy person. So if I see a post that she makes, I don't wonder about that. But this is not true, because Diotima is not, for example, a doctor. So I cannot trust Diotima for her opinion on a medical issue, for example, let's say. Going to the second information hygiene guideline, beware of popular posts. Misinformation studies show travels significantly faster and deeper and more broadly than truth. This means that posts from individuals or organizations that are experts in a topic are not necessarily popular in social media, and vice versa. Posts that they're very, very popular by the influencers, for example, nowadays, doesn't mean that they are trustworthy or true. The third guideline is suggests to be wary of language that is making you feel emotional. This language is designed to become viral, not to inform. So when influencers, again, or even we are composing a post on our social media, we are trying to be a bit catchy as well, so to have more likes and to engage a bit more discussion. So this doesn't mean that that we are very accurate to what we say. So we need to be very careful of the language, because it's proven that online content that evokes high arousal emotions, especially anger and anxiety, is shown to spread faster and more broadly than neutral content that usually is more relied on the facts. So also it's important to know that emotions impact memories. Emotional memories are vivid and lasting, but they're not necessarily accurate. Furthermore, usually misinformation posts use inflammatory and sensational language, which may alter people's emotions. That we see also in blogs that they want to become popular on what language they use to attract for this clickbait, as we said.
All right. Another aspect that we want to point out is watching your own emotions. We know that anger in particular makes us susceptible to biases, in particular political biases. And because we get angry, we start to evaluate incorrectly. Also, anxiety impacts us. Particularly, it promotes initial beliefs that we had within our environment. So studies have found that when we are highly emotional, we believe misinformation more often. So we recommend to be mindful of your own emotions when we post, and yeah, be careful about that. We also know that if you remember back what I initially presented, we know that repetition makes information more trustworthy, more credible. So sharing information based on a headline only can be dangerous, because we may repeat misinformation, or we may put information out of context. And the fact that repetition makes information more trustworthy and credible is even true when we forgot that we have read some information before, or even if we disagree with the information. So we advise not to share any information based on the headline only, but to read the full article and put it in context to avoid influencing your social environment. We also know from research that most people don't want to spread misinformation. They do so by accident. Information overload and other structural and human factors in social media may focus our attention to factors other than truth and accuracy, for example, popularity, as Penelope has mentioned before. So if we are provided with a flag or with a warning sign, this pushes us to think more critically about the information at hand and how trustworthy it may be. So flagging misinformation can be an effective way to warn people even before they read information, and alert them and make them think more critically about what they are supposed to read. So that's important. And we cannot do that for all information. We cannot be constantly alert. That's just not possible for us as humans. We need to handle our cognition. So it's important to have these warning signs for information that is that has some sort of relevance to us or on a societal level. Research had also shown us that misinformation travels significantly faster than true information. And also that novel information is more likely, for example, to be retweeted or to be shared because it attracts our attention and encourages information sharing. And we know that very often breaking news is shared on social media before trustworthy sources report on it, for example, trustworthy news media or other scientific sources. And this can be problematic, for example, in crisis situations, such as terrorist attacks, when a lot of rumors are spreading. This is one example of several. So we advise to be careful of sharing information just because it's new, just because it's attracting your information, or our information rather. Because of the illusory truth effect and the dilemma I've mentioned before, we can, by accident, amplify a post when resharing it with a comment when we want to discredit it or challenge it, because in resharing, we do repeat it. This is a dilemma, but research shows that corrections are effective if they explain why the information was spread in the first place, so what is the reason behind it, and if the correction provide an alternative explanation to this information. So what is wrong about it, and what is evidence that supports that. Finally, we know from confirmation bias that we are more likely to believe articles that agree, or articles or information that agrees with our personal point of view because of our own values and beliefs. But research has shown that if we're asked to rate an article, it pushes us to think more critically about it. So if we're asked to rate the trustworthiness of information, or to flag it if we think it may not be trustworthy, that helps us to critically assess information. And as mentioned before, we cannot do that with every piece of information that we come across. And that's also not necessary. We don't have to think about trustworthiness when we look at a video of a cat, but it may be important for specific political information, or information that is important in a crisis situation, such as the pandemic.
And exactly on this in mind, we developed the Sociotechnical solution in EUNOMIA project. So this, you can see here, this is how our tool looks more or less. Excuse me. It's built on the decentralized social network platform Mastodon. So it's not owned by anybody. Really, we developed this. We own the servers. And it's a decentralized network that I think, following Unix events, I guess you know more on that. So EUNOMIA tools reflected or mirrored these guidelines. So just on the last one, the last information guideline, information hygiene guideline that the EUNOMIA referred to is flag, report untrustworthy or false information. And this is where we are trying to shift the culture from like to trust. Because as the EUNOMIA said, of course, when you see a cat or when you see a nice sunset, it's about whether you like it or not. It's about emotional reaction. But when you hear about information on something that it is important if it's false or true, like if I say to you that this is not a sunset, this is a sunrise, this is an information that we need to debate about, or whether Earth is flat or not. So in this sense, when we put our mindset into the process of whether I trust something, this is more on the critical thinking. So already the trust vote that you can see on our tools, it already puts the user in a position to think about this information that comes across with. Then we can see also how other users have voted. And this does not, also all these tools that you see here do not result in a verdict. Let's say this is to trust or this is not to trust. This is false or this is true. No, these are features that can support the user to think further, to assess further online information and decide for themselves if this content is trustworthy or not. So we can see whether other users trust this information or not, and then we can think, but if I trust this, why so many other people do not trust this? Of course, this can be because there is a troll, but it puts us in this position to think twice of our own approach. Then we see this Greek omega symbol. When there is a buzz going on, we can click on it and get some more information. EUNOMIA users can also set themselves the criteria so that when this omega buzzes is their own personalized nudge. So when this icon is flashing, maybe it's worth checking this post in more detail. So we click on show similar post, and then we have this cascade we can see on the left of the icon, where it shows all the past posts that they are very similar to the one that that we see now. I don't know if you, like in Greece, we were used to play this game called broken telephone. I don't know if this exists to other countries as well, but it's, you know, it's this, it's people who stand next to each other, and then you whisper on the ear one word, and then it's very funny to see how is this word perceived to the last person. This is something like that. Like, how has this information changed through the different users that they have reposted about this, and what are the elements that have changed? So there we can see every post can show the sentiment. This is related to the recommendation of the language that might you feel emotional. So we evaluate, the algorithm evaluates the sentiment of a post. So it shows, it indicates whether it's a positive or negative or just neutral. So the face changes. And then it's also whether it's objective or subjective. So if it's more of an opinion, it looks for words that show that this is more of an opinion, or words that indicate that this is more subjective. No definite verdict, is just an indication for the user to look further. So then we see also on this show more information that we get information about the account age. So a very new account could be created just to promote specific information, for example, or it can be nothing, but it's again worth checking. How many connections they have. So if you have 100 followers and you follow one, it's maybe okay. But if you follow 1,000 and you're followed by 10, does this mean that indicates a bot? And how many posts you have made. So this is an approach that reinforces, encourages and supports the motto that we have adopted in EUNOMIA, which is first assess information, then trust instead of like, and then share it. So whatever we see online and information we see online, no matter where it comes from, who has posted it, we always need to assess the content and then think, would I trust this information or not, before we share and spread in this way our misinformation. And you can also find us in different social media, and would be very happy to hear your thoughts and discuss what we have presented today.
Thank you, Penelope. There are indeed already a couple of questions. Maybe I can read the first one, and then we can decide, we can both answer it. So the first question, the only question I answered so far was the one whether we would share the slides, and I hope it's okay with you that I said we will do. We will provide them, and the session is also recorded.
Exactly.
So the first question, how does misinformation spread on social media, and what can we do about it? Also, how could we, the users, know that the given or received information is misinformation or not? Do you want to give that a try?
Well, I think I hope, and I would ask Devesh to follow up, because this was posted only 10 minutes in the presentation. So I hope that this is what we're trying to discuss and present in our webinar. So if you still have this question, I would be very much disappointed on our presentation.
Yeah, bottom line is it's a complex process, and we just, we presented a couple of the factors that contribute to it. By no means that was complete. There's lots and lots of social scientific research on the aspects, and we still learn more about it. But yeah, let us know if something is still unclear. Going to the next question. Marcel asks, who should flag the sources and the information? There's a danger of censorship, and it's a huge responsibility for one person or group. What are our opinions about that related to the freedom of speech?
Should I start?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think this is exactly what we try to stress, that this is about our responsibility as digital citizens, in a sense, to assess the online information, exactly because a huge responsibility, and we need to be responsible on what we believe for ourselves, and remember that we're responsible also for our network. I think this is what Infodemic has shown, that we are responsible not only for ourselves but also for our network, because we impact much more people than we would do in an offline environment. The problem of misinformation, the problem of propaganda, the problem of these problems are not new problems. They have always been around. I can tell you, for example, from ancient Greece, in the Agora, they were the speakers who were charismatic, and they were giving these great speeches, and the public would trust them and believe in them. Even if they would not always speak the truth or the complete truth, etc. So it's down to education. It's down to digital skills that we need to develop. So it's this everyday activity and action as citizens rather than information consumers. So I think it's our role as citizens to assess the information we see online. And this is why we discuss also this dilemma of anonymity, because we think that, and we strongly believe, we don't think only, we strongly believe that online environment should provide the opportunity to also misrepresented, underrepresented, minority, vulnerable groups to be heard. And if we take anonymity out, maybe this will create further problems to these groups. And exactly, it might exactly result to the danger of censorship, as you said. So this would be, in a nutshell, my approach to this. I think this is a great question, actually.
Indeed. I have nothing much to say other than I think that because it's such a huge responsibility, it shouldn't be just one person or one group. It should be a shared process. And as Penelope mentioned, it's important to give people the possibility to do so. And that's not only connected to a social network, but it's also connected to digital agency. So we need to provide the possibility of education, of getting familiar with the social media, with information, to be able to identify misinformation. Yeah.
Antoine is asking, are you going to explain some practical case of use of the don't trust button? Where does it appear? I guess Twitter or Facebook. Well, Antoine, we hope that our tools will be adopted by social media, especially the decentralized ones. It's an open access code, So any decentralized network can adopt those tools. So I doubt that Facebook would pick up on this, even though they have these related now features or stories feature going on. But yeah, these are tools that we created in the context of the European project EUNOMIA. It's an open source code. You can find it on our website. And we hope that, I think that this is my personal opinion. I think that the more the younger generation is more into the decentralized networks, they're more digitally, they're more tech savvy, and they develop their own social networks, the more they can adopt these kinds of tools, so that we get away of the mainstream social media that they're owned from these big companies that they aim to profit. So let's hope we will see these tools being adopted by decentralized social networks.
The next question is, how can we avoid that the trust and don't trust button is used maliciously? It's a very good question. It's a question has been accompanying us throughout the entire project, and it's a dilemma. I don't think we can avoid it at all. This is the, so to say, danger if we provide such a tool to a community. If we want to give people the freedom to use it and not think for them, then we have to face this danger. And it comes back to what Penelope said: we need to support education, we need to support, give people digital agency. So in a more educated and trustworthy society. And that might sound a bit naive, but we hope that, yeah, this can be avoided. In the context of a social media platform like Mastodon, the administrators can, they have some influence on what's happening there. But yeah, ultimately, we can't prevent this danger completely.
Influence in the sense that they can see malicious behavior, not to influence the content or the votes, but to assess whether an account might be a troll, for example. But again, the trust, don't trust button is not, again, it's not a verdict that this post is indeed untrustworthy or trustworthy. When we vote, even in elections, it doesn't mean that one party is better than the other party, is what the public thinks. So if somebody goes and votes and downvotes and don't trust a post, it doesn't mean that the post is untrustworthy. It means that X amount of users think that this post is not trustworthy. And this is where again, if we think, why do people don't trust that? It doesn't matter if it has more trust votes or don't trust votes. What matters is to make us think about this post. And I think this relates to the next question. The means to flag up misinformation is also available to those who seek to mislead, of course. How do we prevent false flagging, i.e. labeling trustworthy info as untrustworthy, if sufficient flagging is applied to alternative messages, etc., that don't fit with those that misinform? They could label it untrustworthy and in turn mislead. Yes, it does make perfect sense, and I think this is exactly what we're discussing. We cannot just pick one tool and say, I'm going to use this. This is flagged as untrustworthy, and for this reason, I will not believe in that. We need to develop this culture that we need to, and that's why we have created these 9 simple guidelines that we need to go through all of them. We need to practice those.
Mm-hmm. I would also just mention, if we want to practice freedom of speech, we have to give this opportunity also to malicious actors, because we cannot decide for others what to think and what not to think, or at least that's not the spirit we have. Again, it is a bit idealistic what we discuss here, but then again, this is something we want to do to change the way we handle information. Yeah.
Okay. I think then the next question about the tool app to be installed again, you cannot install to the social media because they don't have it to the popular social media because they don't have an open an open code, but in decentralized networks we can. Antoine also expresses his concerns that this can be also an object of disinformation, can be used by groups. Again, I think we discussed that a lot. We cannot avoid. Yes, yeah. Sorry.
No, sorry.
Sorry.
Maybe we can stress it is a research project. We're not defining here a final product that will be on the market ready and ready to use. What we do here is research how such a tool can be used, and further research is needed to see in a real life environment, how does it influence the community? We did have several pilots, but we do not have long-term testing in an existing environment to see, does this change user behavior in the long term? How is it misused, or is it even misused? These are things that are still to be researched for us. That's why we provide this in open source, so it's not just on us, but to the whole scientific community to figure out, is this a theory? Is this an approach that can work, or is it something that would be problematic? Again, it's a research project, so we started with an idea, and we present our findings here.
No, that's a great point that you made, Diotima. We have also the deliverables that will be uploaded on our website, where we have also suggestions for future research. The code is open access, so other scientists, other people can adjust this and can develop further, etc. I think we have responded to the EUNOMIA platform. Again, I think that's a nice Holel. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce the name correctly. Treasure is making a very interesting comment. Is it possible for bad faith actor to leverage the new tools of your social media to pursue the same purpose, spreading false information? I'm just asking because the semantic is important too. If someone somehow succeed in that, the damage could definitely be irreversible. And I cannot see the rest of it, but I think that this semantic thing about playing with the words, this is what algorithms do. This is what influencers do. They are trying to understand how the algorithm works, so to make their posts more viral, right? Or we use in our everyday life, we use our language to persuade the people around us that we are right, for example, or in our work, etc. So if even if we get to think, the average user gets to think how the language is influencing the perception of their of their content, then this is important. Can it be misused? It can be misused, but again, the important thing is that tools like that do not make a verdict. They are for nudging the user into further thinking of this post.
I think that's a perfect bridge to the next question. An excellent question by Yaya, I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Do you feel that misinformation and disinformation can be handled better from the technology level despite systematic barriers to education and digital literacy exist? That is such an excellent question. No, technical tools cannot be the answer. It's a socio-technical problem, and I hope we try to point at that. It is a problem that exists on the one hand in the technical context of social media and the logic of how social media works, but to a great degree, it's a problem of society or of how humans interact and how they share information. And I hope we gave some hints on how different factors of our own cognition, of our own psychology, but also how we interact in groups lead to that. So the technical tools, as Penelope just said, they can be a nudge, they can be a hint, they can be something that make us think because they give us a warning sign, but they can never be the solution. That's something we have to face within society, and we have to, for example, fight for better education, for better digital literacy, for better digital agency for members in society, and especially for those who are marginalized.
Yes, we have this is great, and I cannot add anything more. I think, as Diotima said it all, it's a socio-technical problem. The response cannot be just the technological one. And the lack we had in this project was that social scientists like myself and Diotima, we worked very close with technologies, and this is the way forward, I think. Again, to build these tools that they can nudge the users, but they cannot replace education and critical thinking. We are hoping that our tools promote and support critical thinking, but no technology can replace that. We have some questions also on the chat. So, okay, we got a very good questions that I'm trying to find now. From Thanos Sitisas, he's a journalist and fact checker in Hellenic Hoaxes. I know that they do a great job. We have talked in the context of our project as well, and I would like to thank him for his contribution with his expertise. He's posting a question. In your opinion, how can journalists and fact checkers mitigate the toxicity, including death threats they receive as a result of their work? And I think this is, I don't know if this is correct, the analogy I had in my head with the anonymity. I think that's it relates to anonymity. I think we cannot. Antoine mentioned a concept of infoxication that is very much related to the toxicity that Thanos is bringing up here. And I think we cannot avoid that. What we have noticed and experienced, even with the launch of our tools, is that there are users, there are people, there are citizens who are so much fanatic on their beliefs and their biases that whatever comes against their beliefs, they see it as a threat. They see it as something like that is putting them in danger, and they act in a very bad way. We as researchers even get these threats, we get this toxicity. You can see even on the comments from somebody in the chat earlier that we cannot avoid that. We have a freedom of expression indeed, and everybody can enjoy this freedom. However, I think when it becomes a real danger, this problem of it needs to go to another level, like to the police, so to protect ourselves, I guess. And I guess that you fact checkers, you get this a lot. But as I said, most of it comes from users that they think that they hold the complete and only and absolute truth, and they're the fighters of this truth, and whatever goes against that, they want to fight it, and they want to fight also the person that brings this forward. I still think, though, that you do an excellent work, that people going through your articles where you debug hoaxes, you debug disinformation, you provide information that is very important for them. Now, if they want to believe in this information or not is up to them. As we said, we cannot.
If I may add,
yes, of course.
If I may add, I do not have a solution for this either. And as Penelope said, I think it's something we have to accept. That's something that will happen. It may be partially avoidable if you remember what I mentioned about, or what Penelope mentioned about effective corrections. People can, or we all of us, we can get defensive if our values, if our beliefs are questioned, and fact checks sometimes do that. They have to, because there may be, I may be run into something where it becomes very difficult to change my beliefs. The anti-vax movement at the moment is a good example of that. And the more I am presented facts, the more resistant I become to them. and that can lead to heightened emotionality. So it may be a partial solution the way we present fact checks, but again, as Penelope said, there's no definite way out of it. And I think there's an excellent follow-up question by Katerina, who checks the fact checkers. I think we all should, and that's the reason that we in EUNOMIA have opted for a decentralized approach. We don't want one person to decide, we don't want one organization to decide, but it should be a shared effort in a democracy, in a society, that we all contribute to that, as what Penelope mentioned, the digital citizen.
Exactly. I think that again, this thing about accountability comes up a lot. Who checks the fact checkers? Who checks the media? Of course, the power relations are not symmetrical. Of course, mass media have stronger power than we do, than any average user does, but collectively, we have more power. And I think that, yes, there is no easy solution. There is no easy answer. Education is always a long-term approach. We might not see the results now, but I think we can see the results in the future, on the future generations. It's our responsibility to cultivate education and critical thinking. We provide the tools, but then it takes time. You know, like I think the EUNOMIA gave an excellent presentation on the societal and psychological factors that contribute to the spread of misinformation, exactly because there is such an overload of information that is impossible for anybody, even for us as researchers, to filter and to assess. So it is down to us to not get overloaded by information, not to follow all the discussions in all the forums, etc., etc., etc. It is down to us to go to sources that we have assessed as trustworthy or at least as credible, and apply the tools of assessment. We talked with a lot of fact checkers, journalists, academics in communication studies, and it was especially the practitioners were talking about the instinct. I have an instinct idea whether something, a gut feeling whether something is a fact or an opinion, not about true or false. But this gut feeling, when we followed up, we made followed up questions, it was their experience. You know, Aristotle, I'm sorry, I'm Greek, I bring up Greek philosophers, shoot me. But Aristotle was saying that habit is becoming our second nature. So when we start assessing information at the beginning, it's going to be very time consuming. We will need to actively think and engage with online information. But with the time, while we practice these information hygiene guidelines, for example, every day, it's going to become our nature. It's going to become our gut feeling, because it's going to be this accumulation of knowledge, of practical skills that we have applied more and more on our everyday life.
And I think from the research side, this will also need constant research, because things are changing so fast. There's new social media, and each social media platform has their own different kinds of behavior that users apply, different kinds of way they interact with each other. If you look at comment sections in different social media, you will see that users behave very differently. Look at YouTube and look at Instagram. On the one hand, on Instagram, comments are usually very positive. On YouTube, they're very often fighting or challenging each other. It just changes rapidly, and we need to constantly monitor that on the research side. There's one more question I think we haven't answered by Christina. So our tools are not designed for the use of the biggest social media. We're a European research project, so we didn't do research for Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or YouTube. But as Penelope mentioned, everything we have created is open source. So it is, the tools can be used. It could be adapted for Facebook, for Instagram, for social media for Twitter, or any other social media. But we didn't do that for those platforms because we are a research project and not paid by those social media channels. I think those were all the questions, or do you see anything we've missed?
No, I couldn't see any other questions.
Okay, well, I think those were excellent questions. Thank you so much for asking them.
Yes.
And if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with Penelope and I, or with our social media channels of the project. We will be very happy to continue any of those discussions. I think they were very valuable and help to push us and our research further.
And you can follow us on social media, EUNOMIA, or us as individual researchers. And please do visit our website, eunomia.social. If you want, you can subscribe also to our newsletter to receive our final newsletter that comes at the end of this month. And so you can also find the open source code if you're interested. We have made some creative material like comics. We have this information hygiene guidelines into a comics format that you might use for your pleasure, but also for discussions with your friends, your children, students, and pupils, etc. And I would like to thank you very much for such a great discussion. Thank you for the questions. And this is why we have hope, because we have people who make these questions and do invest time to follow this kind of webinars.
Couldn't have said it any better. Thank you very much, everyone.